So I think the earliest experiences people will have with changing rooms, if they're part of the Roundheads, is PE at school, and that's where like bullying is almost fueled in the changing room, or insults are almost fueled. That large culture is definitely fueled there. So I think a lot of people have always had a negative feeling of it.
Yeah, the locker room before the Roundheads was school, and I didn't feel comfortable, confident, supported, in that space. I felt nervous, worried, like it was an experience I just wanted to get over with.
My first memory would have been probably shoved in the showers in year 7. Full uniform, full bag, beginning of the day, so I was absolutely drained.
The first time I walked in, and it was almost choreographed, that the entire class that I was with all like jumped against the wall. It was like backs against the wall. Polly's coming in.
If you weren't into sports, and I wasn't into sports at all at that point, you kind of dawdled in the park, delayed how long it took you to get to the changing facility, to get to the clubhouse. And then, so that you'd hope that everyone else had changed and was out on the pitch by the time you got there, so that you could be kind of on your own.
It was a very negative place for me growing up in my formative years. It was terrifying, and it is a place that I learned to hate and stopped going to eventually, as a not an out gay person, but as a person finding who I was, and that was pretty obvious to other people at school.
Lockers, it was always just so watch your backstanders coming in.
It was very anxiety provoking, having to go into a locker room or a changing room. You're expected to strip off and get changed in front of peers who you don't know or even don't get along with.
This is a place where you're kind of stripped of any pretense, and that you might kind of give yourself away at a time where you're constantly trying to pretend, to pretend to be straight, to pretend to be one of the guys, and you're constantly aware that you're not. I'm sure there's plenty of young straight guys who don't feel that they belong in that hypermasculine image they see in sports, so they feel uncomfortable about it too. But they're not necessarily trying to pretend to be something they're not, whereas young gay people often are. Certainly I was.
Like, I wouldn't talk like I usually would. I'd put like a deeper voice on. I wouldn't walk a certain way. But then got to about when I was 15, I thought, why not? It's just me.
My back was always in the corner because I wouldn't be dare accused of staring, and people would do that. Against lag culture, people would do that. They would accuse you of staring to alienate you, to make them like better in other people's eyes.
On the pitch, it was absolutely fine. You was playing rugby, but immediately as soon as you got into the locker room, you kind of felt like you had to hide away in a corner, and it would literally be a 2-minute in and out situation. I learned how to get changed with my clothes on and change your boxers and put shorts on while still having your trousers on.
So I played rugby from being like 11 till 17, 18, so I got like 6 years. So, and then I stopped playing for 10 years, and it's that kind of locker room experience that kind of put me off a lot, because it was over that time I started kind of like doing things like drag and pole and things like that, and it was very against that kind of rugby locker room experience where it's kind of a bit of a boys club. It's a bit of a kind of people going to take piss out of you kind of thing if you're doing things like that. You're going to have like, I've got nail varnish on, and that coming as someone who identifies as straight.
That kind of sums up a lot of experience for young gay children. You kind of have to deal with that heartache and that torment, and the locker room sums that up perfectly from that era. It's dark, it's dingy, you're alone, you're scared.
I think you've closed off a bit more, so you're gonna see if people are gonna be taking the piss, if comments are gonna be made, underhand or directly to you. I think now probably going to happen more in that locker room environment. Whereas when you're outside, when you're playing or you're training or whatever, other people around, and it's not a kind of insecure and secured. Whereas when you're in that locker room, you're kind of trapped in a bit, really.
School and PE, and that was always really difficult. At school, everyone presumed that I was just a lesbian, and I used to tell people that I wanted to be a boy, and it was to them I was like the lesbian, but that wanted to be a boy. That was how people viewed me at school, and I had to have all the lessons with the girls and get changed with the girls and everything else. And I used to just put myself in a corner where I wasn't in the eye line of anybody. As you know, if I could hide myself anymore, I would hide myself more. And I'm that person that would get changed kind of like secretly, as little as possible, attention kind of thing. Whereas you get other people that are real confident strutting about kind of thing. I was not like that at all. I was so hidden away. And I constantly felt like people were looking at me or thinking, oh God, what are you doing here?
And I had friends as well who were just completely almost switched off. They were switched off at the idea of playing PE. And we were never asked if it was something that was causing it. It was almost like, oh, do you want to play or not? No, that's fine. We'll just leave you to it. It never was sort of a situation of, why don't you want to play? Why don't you want to do PE? Why don't you want to get involved? And I feel like if I was asked that and I felt confident to talk about it, I would have said, look, like, I don't feel comfortable in these changing rooms because of this, this, and this.
I so overwhelmingly saw it as something that I didn't find comfortable and didn't find accepting.
Those formative years are difficult for everybody. I think, yes, I probably had it harder than most at my school. There were people that definitely had it harder than me. But I think everybody is hard when it's hard for everyone trying to find yourself. And those places of vulnerability bring out a sort of a defense mechanism, I guess. Some people hide away and then others sort of put it all out there.
I came out at quite an early age, and it was pretty obvious. There was no way of hiding it. And it got around school pretty quick. So that segregation started very early, and all the way through school, I would either try and get changed early or I'd go to the toilets. And I eventually kind of got to the point where I would forge signatures, so I didn't have to go into the locker room. I'd be saying that I've damaged my ankle or I broke my wrist, and I'd sign my own signature away. So I got out of PE for many years, even though I loved playing rugby. But it was that sort of fear of being tormented and bullied.
Yeah, I faked a back injury for a good year to get out of, particularly get out of playing rugby, ironically. I was much happier sort of taking my book into the clubhouse and reading and watching the other guys playing and avoiding it as much as I could.
It's very clicky, and it's very kind of being difficult to have when there is them clicks, and because it's really hard to kind of break into that and kind of not feel excluded, even though you're meant to be part of the same team.
Just this big expanse with benches all around the outside, and it was tiled and everything echoed. So any slurs I sort of heard twice because it all echoed, and it's very loud and boisterous. It was very overwhelming as a space, actually, when I was at school.
So there was a kind of natural, casual comfort that they all had in this community of just being straight, which didn't work for me.
When I was younger and earlier in my life, I am transgender, and I used to play on mixed teams when I was a child, because you can play mixed up till 12, I think. And at that time, I was the only girl in the team. And I would go to other matches looking like a little boy, and then they would have to, my coach was lovely, but they would have to turf me out, and they'd sometimes have to put me in a toilet cubicle to get changed or washed, because there would be nowhere else physically in the clubhouse for someone to go change on their own. So I have changed in some like really weird and wonderful spaces in clubs, and obviously all I ever wanted to do was join in with the boys and be one of them. So to be kind of took out even at that age, and when I'm playing in a mixed team, that was difficult. And then when after I turned 12, I had to be put in for a women's team. I remember the feeling of going into the change rooms with them for the first time, and I was so nervous because I think I knew vaguely I still looked quite female, but I wanted to be male so bad, and I still didn't look like the other girls. Like, I was very masculine at that age, and I was really, really nervous about changing amongst them and being amongst them. And I think even though there were stereotypes about women and women's rugby being really butch, the girls that I was in a team with were not. I mean, they used to get dressed up in makeup dresses to go watch the lads and to go to the clubhouse and pull the guys that they could from that were playing the other matches. So they were like the girliest girls, and then it was like me, and I just found the masculine girls that I could kind of hang around with.
It was a double consciousness of when you're gay or young gay boy, or when you're coming to realize that yourself of that you are a boy, part of all of these experiences, but you're not really one of them. And I think there's always a kind of envy about the kind of casual straightness how natural, how confident and comfortable so many of the other boys I saw at school were.
90% of the trouble was that I didn't feel safe, because ultimately I guess I wasn't safe. I wasn't kept safe in that space, and I think it was sort of allowed to happen because it was easier if I wasn't part of the group.
The fear would have come from knowing that I could have potentially encountered some altercations, being shoved in the showers in full uniform when I was at school, or being singled out, shoved outside the locker room, not feel welcome, or that sort of thing.
It wasn't more like a fear of being gay in a locker room. It was almost like that alienation of like, you're an outsider for a different reason and everyone's looking at you for that reason. It just felt very off-putting, and like I felt very nervous in the situations.
When I was at school, I had a lot of good experiences at school and a lot of really good teachers that were lovely, but it was generally the way of dealing with it was to just not talk about it unless I went to them with a specific thing that I wanted fixing or whatever. So if there was a way that I could have joined the boys' classes, that would have changed my life. That's all I wanted at that age.
There probably were members of staff that had sort of outdated ideas, definitely. Like there were teachers that were probably 2 generations older than mine. So those that were almost at retiring age would have had some antiquated ideas, I imagine.
Stereotype of gay is flamboyant, camp, they can't do anything. And then you've got to like be on the act a certain way. They can't play rugby because they'll get hurt.
I think for me the biggest one is that we love to stare. I've had this comment all the time, being that you're a great person, but just don't hit on me or don't like make a move on me.
I remember at school everybody thought I would be trying to feel them up or trying to look at them, when actually I was just trying to do the exact opposite of that. I just didn't want to draw attention to myself. I didn't want anybody to look at me. And I think people think that you're sort of predatory and that you're in there to try and turn people and to try and that you are this sort of lascivious, predatory person that is almost like debauched and can't control themselves.
Same way it's like, we would want to make a move on you in the locker room. That's something that's probably the least of my concerns in the locker room / change room situation. I'm much more concerned about, getting quick change as quickly as possible and getting out of there, because I'm very, very uncomfortable.
The guys would still always have it as like a negative connotation, like you're going to hit on them or you can't wait to catch them in the change rooms, that sort of thing. And it was nothing like that. And
at school, it was like, he's gay, he's going to fancy every single straight man. But yeah, I think it's just the whole stigmatism behind it. Like, he's gay, I've got to watch himself now. One of them.
I don't know if that stereotype has changed much, actually, because I still, as membership secretary, still get people messaging me, asking me what are the showers like, I bet you're all sleeping with each other, and so on. Not nice, not as nicely worded as that.
People who, dare I say, have very close-minded views of the LGBT community, both inside and outside, have this idea that the locker room is there almost like a hookup culture, which it completely isn't. Like I said before, you're literally there to get changed, have a catch-up, how your week went, and get off to training.
Some people have messaged the club and made kind of comments about the not dropping the soap.
Obviously, the more comfortable people in the locker room were those that were good at sport, and therefore were more likely to have the required physique. The people that were not good at sport were then ostracized and then or pushed out actively, and PE was never a nice space for them. So then they would not go to PE, which was probably the only exercise. I know for me, it was the only exercise I would get during the week, which then compounds the issue of your body confidence, and it's a sort of self-fulfilling cycle.
As a kid, I would always wear extremely baggy clothing to hide everything and almost give myself no shape. And so to almost take that off and be in a position where, you know, everything you're insecure about is on show for everyone else, everything you've tried to hide with clothing, just almost open for scrutiny. Yeah, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And it can, honestly, it can really fuel it. It can fuel that body, that self-consciousness. I remember like absolutely dreading, I've had friends who have absolutely dreaded for weeks, every week, to have to do that again. And it's, you know, looking back, it's 10 minutes, but it's a very traumatic 10 minutes.
I'm much more comfortable about it now. I think that shame that I used to have at school, one of the big things that's changed in my life is, you know, as soon as really coming out, gaining that kind of confidence, becoming obviously more and more I became comfortable with my sexuality. I became more and more comfortable with my body as well.
There've been so many other times when I was younger, when I'd played in different teams and I'd had, you know, insecurities or worries, whether that be about my body or if somebody thought I was looking at somebody, which, you know, I wasn't because I was too worried. And you know, I was always full of worry about what people would think about me, whether it was about the way I looked or the way I acted or whatever it was, or if they could somehow figure out that, you know, I wasn't a straight boy.
If someone's particularly anxious or nervous, that would just be their worst nightmare, to have people just all around them in a vulnerable position.
But with obviously joining the Roundheads, it's made me like, obviously, well, I don't have to look a certain way because obviously you've got all these like Instagram models, stuff like that. And it's like, well, this is me. I'm quite happy with the way I look at the minute. And then it's like other people, like they might be a bit overweight, but they're happy. It's like, why do you need to be one way to be happy? It's like, just embrace yourself.
We say rugby's a game for all sizes. For people who you can be a bigger lad or lass and kind of still be playing, but you can use forward rather than back, or you could be really small and kind of skinny, but you're back pitch or you're back. So it kind of in that sense, rugby's a bit different. But I think people still are really insecure, and I think that comes out in different ways. Like I said, I would take myself off and not really want to be involved. I could not want to be there because of my consciousness of what my back looked like and not want to. I think you then also got the insecurity about kind of whether you feel like you're part of that group or not. That's that in group. Because again, I never felt really right. I was part of that. Felt like on the outside for whatever reason.
I think LGBT people, and certainly my generation, obviously I am speaking with someone who was growing up in the 70s and 80s, but I think it's tougher for them because of a kind of internalized sense of shame. Something we've been kind of grown up to, you know, we were certainly impressed upon us then that, you know, being gay was something shameful, not quite right, something, you know, slightly, you know, unnatural in some respects. And so having internalized that sense of shame, as I say, you've got this kind of double consciousness that you you're looking at things. Once you become aware of your sexuality or start to become aware of your sexuality, you're looking at things, you know, from an outsider's perspective. So you don't really feel that you're kind of part of that group. You're also aware that if people become consciousness of that you are gay or that you're an outsider, or could become suspicious of that, but you're trying to you've got to cover it up somehow. And in a place where what you're doing all the time is taking clothes off and, you know, exposing yourself, it's a very exposing place to be. And when you're trying to cover it, when you're trying to cover it up, you're trying to cover up your sexuality, you're trying to hide it. The place where you're kind of totally exposed is where it becomes kind of scary and uncomfortable.
At that age, when you're a teenager and when you're young, hormones are flying, everyone's talking about dating, everyone's looking at each other and saying who's pretty, who's not pretty. You're starting to explore like boyfriends and girlfriends for the first time. And I think there's just then that underlying pressure that everyone has inside of wanting to fit in when they're at school. And I think if you don't fit into what is deemed, normal amongst your group or your class or whatever, it's scary to say, actually, no, to kind of like stick your neck out and say, yeah, I'm different and I'm gay or I'm trans or I'm bi or whatever it might be.
I think it's a very hard space because it is associated with typically masculine, testosterone driven sport. I think anyone with any sort of LGBTQI+ representation immediately feels segregated from that. From that young age, it's a lads thing. You play sport, you do football, you do rugby, you've got to be macho, you can't cry, you've got to be butch, and all those connotations stick with that locker room.
Groups of guys all together, it's like that super macho atmosphere of, we're all into girls, we're all big muscly guys kind of thing. And I've played other sports before and been really nervous about mentioning about sexuality or definitely mentioning about gender and stuff. I used to worry to bits about showers and being the odd one out or someone would notice. And it's really, really nice not to have to kind of worry about that anymore.
I think toxic masculinity has always been a prevalent thing in sports regardless. It's always been an outlet for men that's been unchecked since sports began. Towel whipping, twanging people's backsides, body shaming, and that can be perceived as like banter or just generally joking around with your mates. But when you're a vulnerable LGBTQ+I person, that is an attack on someone. That can be someone's vulnerability, that you're assaulting the person.
I think as well, because it is a situation where it is all males crammed into one space, and by males I mean like straight males with that lad culture, it almost, there's no one there to challenge those, like, dare I say, homophobic, potentially sexist, potentially misogynistic behaviours and speeches that a lot of times can come out their mouths.
People that probably aren't that masculine project masculinity and inflate themselves in order to convince other people, convince themselves. I'm not really sure. I know when from a Roundheads experience, I know when the other team is in the locker room next door, we all are louder, are more boisterous, walk around with your shoulders back and your chest puffed out. So I think it is part of like an intimidation technique.
It tends to be more like, it could be like insulting others, like putting someone else down to rise themselves up.
I remember a PE teacher at the time singled out people for certain things, and for whatever reason it was my turn to be picked on, and I had to do star jumps, and it wasn't like a normal star jump. I had to also repeat "I'm a pink fluffy star" while doing these star jumps in front of the whole class.
I went to a rural secondary school in a small rugby town, but the notion of team was very entwined with laddish kind of banter and drinking and comments and jokes that I never felt comfortable with, and that was so deeply intertwined with what the guys thought being a team was.
I've always seen laddish culture as, dare I say, showing off, or like almost like a competition on who's like the top dog in inverted commas. How people have kissed this many people, who have they got with, who haven't they got with. And it's almost like the assertion of dominance on the other males.
The jokes are perhaps more about, manliness and manning up and, taking people on and giving them, challenging them in an aggressive way, and making your mark.
For me, joining Roundheads kind of helped me fall back in love with rugby again. I didn't just stop playing, but I kind of really fell out with the game a little bit because of that whole kind of stereotype of the locker room and rugby kind of being so that toxic masculinity kind of area where it's like you can't go do these things. Whereas with the Roundheads, it doesn't feel like that. It just feel like you've got that support there. You've got that community around you.
With the Roundheads, there's always happy memories with the Roundheads.
Masculinity in the Roundheads locker room, it's weird. I kind of almost don't think of it in that way. I think what's so refreshing about it is that you don't feel that in any way, shape, or form. You know, the chat and the jokes, they're not about kind of heightening or lowering your masculinity. They're not about kind of trying to tear you down or build you up in that sense either. It's a different kind of chat and joke. It's more kind of accepting of people's sensitivities.
There's always going to be a level of the weird banter that becomes acceptable. You know, you've got to be able to have a laugh and have fun with teammates, but it's about knowing where that boundary is.
I mean, I can see in some ways where it comes from. You know, being part of a team, you feel very much together. You feel very much like that you're close to people, that you have openness and honesty, and that you can, you know, say and do what you want and what you think, and they are accepting of that. And while in the context of an LGBTQ plus rugby club, for example, that's quite a positive thing. Perhaps in a straight club, in a conventional toxic masculinity fueled locker room, that can be something else, and it can be quite a negative togetherness, a negative closeness. You know, you can feel you can perhaps say or do things that you wouldn't feel you could say or do outside of that.
Gay and inclusive teams are really special because it is a complete safe space about LGBT and inclusivity, and that's talked about and pushed, and it helps with all the other support things that we can get hold of.
All I wanted it to be is like a safe space for everyone. It's like no matter what age you are, gender, sexual orientation, just come along and have a laugh. That's what I missed about rugby. It was like when you go into like the straight rugby, it's like, oh, you got to win, blah blah blah, start fighting, etc. Whereas obviously with this rugby, no matter what you do, you're always going to be all right with the people you're playing against.
Like when I started with the Roundheads, that was the first time that actually I wasn't worried about walking in and about my body. Like it was more just, oh my God, nervous about the match, because that used to be piled on top of everything else before. Whereas this time I could go in and I was me, and that was fine, because it wasn't, oh God, someone's looking at my chest, or oh God, you know, I mean, I still do get a shower kind of in my pants and get dressed under a towel, but like it's less of a problem. I don't feel like everyone's gawping at me. It's just kind of, I'm there and I'm one of everybody.
I could understand why it was sort of intoxicating to these boys at school, because I enjoyed that feeling of team spirit, this brotherhood, like this fraternity almost, and you just felt part of something.
And the great fun thing about it now is that kind of banter that used to go on in the changing rooms that you witnessed when you were younger goes on. That teasing, that banter happens, but it's with a bunch of other gay or bi guys or allies. It's so different. It's, you know, it's kind of camp. It's silly. It's rude. People are kind of making comments about each other.
It allows me to kind of feel like I can just go and just be myself. It's just that inclusivity. I can turn up to training like I said with a nail varnish on, and not feel like it's going to be like frowned upon, or it's going to end up like kind of be like bullying kind of way or intimidation. It's going to do some of that.
To join the Roundheads and get changed there and even shower there and not feel any, you know, not having to feel anxious or uncomfortable or self-conscious was a really refreshing relief.
People made me feel welcome, and playing as a team and then coming back in seemed already like just after the first session of playing with people that had made an effort to talk to me, made an effort to pass the ball to me, I felt more at home. It wasn't like at school anymore, and I could feel comfortable to get changed wherever. If there's no room at the bench, I would get changed in, like, sometimes it's quite a small locker room, and there used to be quite a few of us, so some of us would be in the middle of the room getting changed, and I was okay with that.
Now, I think the difference for us is it's a welcoming space. So we'll generally have a chat, before we get changed. Like, everyone's welcome. There's no sort of hiding in the corner. There's no body shaming, which can be associated with a lot of locker rooms of the past. It's a very supportive family, and it's a very close-knit family. And within the first half an hour, you know, you're welcomed into the family.
It's that spirit that you feel before and after a game, or before and after training. There's that kind of common thread of the experience you're about to go through or that you have been through. That's heightened, obviously, around a game. There's nerves beforehand, for sure, but you're all nervous, and that's unifying. And afterwards, there's either the euphoria of having gotten through it, even if you've lost, or the euphoria of having won it, if you've achieved that. And that, as well, kind of is unifying. Everyone's feeling the same thing. It's very, very rare for anyone in the room to be feeling something different after or before a match.
I think it's probably because the majority have a shared experience of the locker room being a scary space, and therefore you've got empathy for other people. And I think for the allies on the team, it is their ability to understand that it is a vulnerable space, and as queer people coming to play rugby, coming to get changed in that space, we don't feel 100% safe straight away. And I think our allies on the team are really good at that, at normalising that situation.
It felt very liberating to walk into a changing room with people who have also experienced this sort of alienation, to feel comfortable enough to have those conversations, and that environment's almost infectious, like, because they were comfortable to have a conversation, I felt comfortable to have a conversation. You know, I'd walk in there, take off all 18 of my earrings and everything else, and take off all my very out there clothing and put on sportswear, and it was no different than someone else who would walk in wearing a hoodie and a tracksuit and get changed as well.
Now, obviously, it's a very welcoming space. That fear's gone. Kind of relish knowing that you can go and do a sport that you enjoy without that sort of ridicule or segregation anymore.
But even just putting that kit on for the first time, that was another really exciting thing of, oh my God, look around at each other now. Like, we are all part of this team and this is amazing. And then for me now, like, every time I put the kit on, that's really special because it says Hull and that's where I'm from. And then it's got pride on it. It's got rainbows on it. For me, I can just pick out bits of that kit and that's just us.